we're here at NamesCon 2016 with Morgan Linton. Morgan, how are you doing? And thanks for coming down.
I'm doing really well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great. So I actually just sat in on your masterclass recently. Do you want to talk a little bit about what
Sure.
what the topic was on?
Yeah, so I just did a talk about startup accelerators and kind of how to evaluate where you're at in the life of your business and if an accelerator is the right move for you. And then looking at the accelerator ecosystem, understanding some of the pros and cons there. So yeah, really interesting to cover kind of our own experiences, but then also hear from the room what other people were thinking about and trying to understand.
Absolutely, and I think we need more of that at these types of events too, because we're heavily focused on domainers, but we also want to look at development, end users,
Yes.
startups. That's where the space is really going to grow. I think you're helping a lot with stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, a lot of people think that it's two disconnected markets, but it's not. They're actually incredibly connected and getting more and more connected every day. So the more that domain investors can understand startups, and the more that startup founders can understand domain investors, the better it is for all of us. And I wrote a Medium article about what every startup founder should know about domain names, and it was, I think, eye-opening to a lot of startup founders who look at all of us as squatters. And I hear it all the time, like, oh, squatters. Yeah, and like the thing that I was pointing out in the article is like, well, that's not always the case, and actually domainers are incredibly creative people that are actually interested in startups. But I think domainers understanding startups better helps across the board, from negotiation to acquisition and everything in between.
Right, I think there's, like you said, there's a disconnect there, and we're trying to bridge the gap.
Yep.
It's definitely helping with that.
Yep.
More to the side of domain names now.
Yeah.
I guess we started there, now we're on domain names.
I remember domain names.
Yeah, I think you might know something
about that. I haven't talked about domain names, but actually, Sean.
Yeah. What do you think about the new GTLDs that are coming out and everything that's going on right now? Do you have any favorites you'd like to share with us?
Sure,
Speak on it a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a great question. Obviously, like one of the most poignant questions in the industry now. Yeah. So I think that new GTLDs will do incredibly well. What we all have to remember is that a year after .com launched, there weren't tens of millions of .com names registered. So everyone's going to have to realize that also, like a startup, new GTLDs are like startups, it's going to take time for it to grow. I do think that there's probably an oversaturation of extensions, and so that's going to be a challenge. I think that the registries know that, though, so they're prepared for it, but you're not going to have like 1,000 new GTLDs take off like a rocket ship and be great investments. And so that's where I think you have to be careful. Domainers historically have a really hard time staying focused. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's because we're all really excited about this, and domain names, very few people own just one, and so you instantly have more and you're thinking about those. And so I think it can be very overwhelming, and I think domainers have to be very careful not to have the behavior of, oh, well, let me get like one of each. Because if you buy 1,000 new GTLDs and it's just one of each, you're probably going to lose out on 900 to 950 of them. Right. I think realistically, GTLDs that'll have a meaningful market value, it'll probably be somewhere around 50 of them. I think it's pretty clear who some of the front runners are now. I think .club is an amazing example.
We just interviewed Colin earlier from .club.
Cool. Okay.
So
One
of the front runners.
They're a great example because they know the business, they know how to market it, but they also got an extension that's very valuable. And that's the thing, is it's really like this secret sauce. I've talked to people before about like, well, what does it take to run a successful registry? And Colin and Jeff are good examples. Frank's a good example. Daniel's a good example. Dan and Paul are good examples, right? It's people that not only know this business, but also have bought extensions that have real value. And .club and the way they're marketing, that's great. So that's one that I really believe in. I think some of the ones that haven't come out yet could be really interesting. Anything that's shorter, I think that once you get into things that are 7 or 8 or 9 characters, it gets a little bit too long.
Very difficult.
So I think that could hurt value. I think going much above 4 is tough. That XYZ has done great. We've all seen that. Absolutely. Google rebranding themselves on it.
That's a good sign of it, right?
Doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
There's some other ones like .guru that have just seen lots of great organic interest. I think that makes sense because, there was .info, but all the .infos were bought originally by people that were either doing spamming, or because they were so cheap, they were either doing spamming or building some info sites, but it never really fulfilled the promise of you'd think of a .info as a place to go for information. I think TLDs like .guru kind of lend themselves to that, .wiki, things like that are short. But as for which have real resale value, it's going to come down to use. right? Who is using them? I think that's why if you look at a TLD like .co, that's where they really hit it out of the park, and Juan and Lori are great examples of also people that have the right expertise to do it, but it's short, it's meaningful, but the use is massive because the more times that a startup or a big brand rebrands on the extension, the more valuable the extension is. And so the use is key, and that's where I think you see probably .club really in a good place with that, where they're really focusing on, hey, how can we make sure that people are buying these and using them and doing something meaningful? And that for us, as investors, is great as well because that also makes the extension more valuable.
Right. And building on that a little bit more, how do you think larger Fortune 500 companies are going to form the space a little bit more, like Google and other people buying these and creating these new GTLDs? Who would you like to see actually enter the industry maybe?
Google's a good one, but a scary one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Facebook could be a good one, also a scary one in some ways. But that's a really good question. I mean, I'd like to see brands embracing new GTLDs. So one example is I was looking at like some of the .help names and thinking probably the only valuable .help names, or the most valuable .help names, are the trademark infringing .help names. So domainers shouldn't buy them. Yeah. But if a company like Microsoft puts their support site on Microsoft.help, and Google puts their support site on Google.help, and consumers start to go, oh, rather than like right now, my heuristic for getting support or help on a website is I go to the website, I scroll to the bottom, and there's a bunch of links at the bottom, and one of those is usually support or help. If I could go, oh, I put in company name.help, and that happens, and the more that happens, that is what will create a behavior change, right? Right now we say it's got to end in .com, but that change is going to happen over the next 5-10 years, and so I think it's really brands embracing, not necessarily brands or companies entering the space, but using them, and so that you don't look at a brand or a company as a single entity.com, but you look at the different parts of it. So Microsoft.help is the support site, but Microsoft.club could be something around developers or people that are doing something related to
mindset.
It, right? Yeah. So yeah,
absolutely. And speaking of change, I know we're having a large influx of Chinese investors right now. What do you think about the new numeric domain trend and everything else that's going on? Right.
I was going to say there's two big questions.
Yeah, that's the follow-up.
New GTLDs in China.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm someone that does like to have an opinion, so I'll go on record with an opinion, which some people just kind of try to play it with like, well, if this and that, but no, I'll come out with the opinion. I do not think we're in a bubble. I've heard a lot of people say we're in the bubble. I don't think we're in a bubble. Now, I don't have any data to say that we're not, but we also don't have any data to say that we are. You don't really know you're in a bubble until you're on the other side of the bubble, right? And so what I think we're having now is a change in the way that domain names are valued, and I think what we're looking at is domain names as an asset class. And so if you look at what's sold 5 years ago, you're looking at keyword names, you're looking at brandables, you're looking at product names, and the value of those is very hard to agree on, right? It's something that if I'm a lawn care company and I own lawn.com, that's very meaningful to me. If I'm a car company, lawn.com may not be as valuable to me. And so the value of those assets, the liquidity is very, very variable. Whereas now what we have is investors in China that are valuing names based on numbers, based on specific letters. And so when you have this market where a 4-character domain that starts with the letter A will sell for a different price than a 4-character name that starts with the letter R, and you can start to get a science behind it, well, now you have a real asset class that's emerging. And I think that's what we've all needed, because there's just been a lot of randomness in the industry, right? Like if you look at lots of big sales, it's great if we could all say every time we have a big sale, like, yeah, it's because I'm awesome. But I don't know if many of my best sales have been anything outside of luck, and then sure, I've done a good job negotiating them, but the initial piece happened with luck. Now I think we have a way where we can all agree on why something is valuable and what attributes to that value. And so, if that's what happens and it's not a bubble, then I think we all win tremendously so. But, as for where this is going, what's going to happen with China, I think this year is going to be incredibly telling, but I think we can't say that it's a bubble, because saying it's a bubble means that we kind of expect things to be the same as they've been, and that when these things happen, they're like a blip in the radar. I think the world changes much faster than we're probably all prepared for, and so while it may seem impossible that it could change, I think it's a great kind of excuse to say, well, then it must be a bubble, but don't worry, things will go back to the way that they were, and I'm okay with things not going back to the way that they were, because I think that realistically speaking, the best opportunities come from these changes in market dynamics.
Absolutely. We live in a very small domain world.
Yeah.
I think it's about to get a lot bigger.
Yes, exactly.
Building more on that, do you see any other countries nearby entering the space as well, like India, kind of doing something similar in the next 10 years maybe, with small business coming alive?
India, yes, for sure. India's got huge tech space, investment space. I think places like Russia, places like Brazil. You have some very wealthy, successful countries, and the investment landscape globally is changing because real estate and the stock market, which have been kind of the go-to forever, are not the vehicles they used to be. For some they are, but overall it's just a different landscape. And so I think that people are looking for, where do we put our money next if the stock market is not really where we get our returns, or if real estate is not really where we get our returns? And so when you're looking for a new asset class, some thought it would be Bitcoin, and maybe there will be some type of currency. But otherwise, I think if you look at an asset class that can really appreciate and that you have these type of market dynamics, domain names are it. And so I think you're going to see, countries like India, like Russia, like Brazil will probably be next in my opinion.
Great, that's some great advice, and everybody should look out for that too. We didn't meet for the first time until last NamesCon, and it's funny because we both have somewhat similar backgrounds. You were in Hollywood for a little while, or doing Hollywood
briefly,
type things.
Very briefly,
my background, if you don't know this by now, I'm also have a background in film stuff. And then you were in, your company Fashion Metric was in Techstars. My last company, I sold it to Techstars. But we didn't actually meet until NamesCon. And I just wanted you to speak a little to that effect of the importance of NamesCon and what advice you would give to someone if they're thinking about not going next year.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've known Richard and James for years, and when I originally heard they were going to do a conference years ago, I thought, that's incredible. These are great people to do it. They've definitely delivered. The amazing thing about the domain community, I met Braden, who's a good friend of mine, also a Fashion Metric investor. He brought a good friend of his to NamesCon for his very first time, and I asked him after the first day, what did you think? And he said, well, I'm so blown away. He said, everyone's comfortable sharing what they do and what they know and what's worked for them and what hasn't. He said, I've never seen an industry like that. And that speaks volumes for the type of community we have here. If you're in any other space, you tend to be very, very competitive. We all know that there's more than enough domain names out there and that we can probably all help each other out. And so, my biggest pitch to anyone that's on the fence about coming to NamesCon is, don't just think of it, there's great talks, you'll get to meet tons of companies in these booths, but don't just think of it for that. Think of this as the community and what you get out of that network effect of the community. And so it's like, it may be that you go to a conference and you hear some great seminars, but what really made the biggest impact is someone that you had a beer with at one of the evening events, and they made you think about things in a totally different way. And the reason why that's possible here and not as possible other places is because people are so open to sharing what they do. And that's just what makes the domain industry unique. And we can share through our blogs and through forums, all that, and that's super valuable. But it's incomparable to being in person. If you're investing thousands of dollars in domain names, you can't afford not to invest money coming out here, because that's just going to grow your investments and your own network that much faster.
Absolutely. Would you like to say anything about your current main focus right now, Fashion Metric? Maybe even say anything domain related to, I'm not sure if you can talk about how you bought the name or stumbled upon it.
Well, we hand registered the name.
Okay. Really? How long ago did you do that? Because that's a great name.
It wasn't even me. Daina hand registered. Daina was looking at doing a fashion blog, and she registered like 10 domains for the fashion blog, and one of them was Fashion Metric. And then we were in Lean Startup Machine, and we were coming up with an idea. We realized we needed a domain name, and we picked Fashion Metric. And then when the business became something that's actually related to metrics around fashion, we realized Well, that worked out pretty well. So yeah, we hand register that. I mean, one thing I do believe in is what I call the Trifecta, which is having the domain name, having the Twitter account, and having the Facebook account all matching. So we were very careful about that, and we got all of those. And that's like, just like we look at a .com and say, well, if you have the .com, you have this value of word of mouth where you say, I can tell you I work at Fashion Metric, and you're going to go to fashionmetric.com. I don't have to say I'm Fashion Metric something else. Same thing with a Twitter handle or with a Facebook handle. If somebody sees you speaking at an event or hears about you, they're just going to @reply your name. And if you don't have that, that's going to go to somebody else. And so I think the value is not just in the domain, but those other digital assets around it, which I think together create that online brand.
Right, you can't afford not to do that.
Exactly.
It's a big brand.
Yeah, and you have to be careful if someone's doing something similar to you and they have your Twitter handle, it can be incredibly confusing for customers, right?
Yeah.
So just making sure that you have those, and then if you can't get those, and if there's someone doing something confusingly similar, save yourself the pain and find a different name where you actually can have those matching.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
NamePros is making this possible. We're filming a lot at NamesCon. Awesome. I know you're active on NamePros a little bit.
Yep.
Would you like to speak a little bit more to that effect about what you think is useful or the importance of a community online?
Well, yeah, I mean, this ties into exactly what I was saying about coming to something like a NamesCon. A NamesCon happens once a year, right? This doesn't happen every day, but forums like NamePros are active every single day, and it's the same people. It's the same people that want to share and discuss what they're doing and talk about their experiences, and that's really the best way to learn. You can learn through your own mistakes. That will be the slowest way to learn because there is an incredibly good chance that many other people have made the mistakes that you're making right now. And the sooner you can realize what those mistakes are, the sooner you can avoid them. And so yeah, you'll get a lot of benefit out of going to a conference like this once a year, but for the rest of the year, how are you going to continue that learning? And that's where forums come in. Forums, blogs can all help, but forums is where you get the most saturation of content and information. And the nice thing is, you can decide how interactive you want to be. Maybe, sometimes it can be really intimidating if you're just starting out. And so you can go to a forum and just learn and not really have to worry, and there's so much content there. You could spend a ton of time just going through content, but then when you want to jump in, you can ask something, and this all goes back to this community. People will respond and want to help you. They won't laugh at you. They won't say, oh, you're stupid, how could you think that? They actually want to help you. And so, that community that we have here doesn't just exist here in person, it exists on forums like NamePros, and being able to avoid making the mistakes that others have made is the fastest way to grow your business.
Absolutely, and thank you very much. It's well put. Is there any advice you'd like to give new domainers out there? Maybe just 2 points that they should follow when they're very green in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, my first advice to new domainers, the first thing I tell anyone that says I just got in the domain industry, I said immediately stop buying domain names. That's always my first advice, because what new domainers do is they just buy a ton of domain names. Take a step back and learn. This also ties into this, but I think the first thing new domainers should do is go to NamePros, read blogs on domaining.com, read DN Journal. We have amazing content out there. Go to shows like this, learn before really diving in and buying.
Go to morganlinton.com.
Sure, go to morganlinton.com. And then, so stop buying. Biggest mistake you're going to make is you get really excited, you just keep buying and buying and buying until you learn. You're not going to learn that much buying a bunch of junk. You'll just realize, hey, I bought a bunch of junk and I have to drop it. That lesson you should just know you'll learn anyways. And then, I think the second piece is being patient and knowing that this is not an industry where you just buy a domain name and you sell it for double what you paid or 10 times what you paid right away. We have great sales, we have great returns, but this is a hard business, so do not underestimate how hard this business is to make money in. There's a reason why right now, this is a 1,000-person conference, not a 100,000-person conference. This is a hard business, and so be patient and don't get discouraged, because you probably will, for your first couple of years, not have out-of-the-park home runs. But if you can be patient and continue to learn, as you start to really understand how the industry works, those opportunities will come up, but you got to be patient. I think too many people start by buying a bunch of names, not really learning, throwing them on marketplaces, they don't sell, and then going, the domain industry is impossible, you can't make money. And you kind of broken my 2 rules. You bought domains, but you shouldn't have done until you learned, and then you expected to have results before it's realistic.
Right. where would you like the industry to go, and do you see anything sort of missing in it right now?
I would like the industry to go really in the direction that we've seen it going, which is domain names as an asset class. So less randomness and the ability to calculate and agree on a value, right? It's just like my example with lawn.com, right? To a lawn care company, it could be worth $1 million. To a company that builds submarines, it could be worth absolutely nothing, right? And so that's confusing, and that also makes it hard to have liquidity. And so I think the more that we can get to determinism around pricing of, hey, if it's this combination of letters, it's worth this. If you swap this letter out with this letter, then it's this. If it's these numbers, then it's this. I think that as a whole, not that keyword.coms are going to go away. You're always going to have great 1- and 2-word domain names, and there's always going to be a market for those. But to be able to have something that becomes a investment that the wider audience can use, how we get to be 100,000 people at a conference like this is if there's a way for your average person to look at a name and know the value without having to go through the massive learning curve that I talked about. Because your average person can't go through that learning curve now, whereas I can invest in the stock market by reading a book by Jim Cramer and just buying some stocks, and I'll probably be just as good as any other stock investor that's kind of an individual investor, and it's non-intimidating. It's too intimidating now because there's too much randomness to the values and to the sales, and so the sooner that we can get to domains as a true asset class with a calculatable value, the bigger it's going to be. So I'd love to see this, what everyone's saying, quote unquote, bubble, prove itself not to be a bubble.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully that sort of algorithm or machine learning type of stuff will come out soon to help us solve that problem. Is there anything else you'd like to say to NamePros members?
Share. Don't be afraid to share, but when you share, don't just share your successes, share your failures. I think there's way too many people that only share when something goes well, and what they're sharing is the lucky stuff, and it's harder to learn from that. So it's much better to share when stuff doesn't work. And that's what I also like about events like this. When I have a beer with someone at night, I don't just say so what's working in your business? I go, hey, what was the thing that really screwed you up last year? Or what's keeping you up at night right now? We have to do more of that. And it's okay, it takes a little bit of humility to do it, right. But you're going to learn the most lessons from the mistakes that other people made, not the times that things worked out.
Absolutely, and that's a great piece of advice. I think that's a real problem right now too, especially with social media. Everyone talks about all these successes.
Yep.
You feel like you're maybe a failure because you don't have all your ducks in a row at one point in time, but it takes some time to get there.
I see this on Facebook, right? It's like if you look at your Facebook timeline, everyone's talking about how awesome their day is, right? I rarely see it read. I rarely see it read. When I look at someone's year in review, I'm like, wow, every single day of your year was amazing. But then I realize, well, I kind of do that too. And so it's like we kind of have to retrain ourselves to be more comfortable sharing when we fail. And I think as a society, it's not, this is not something that is endemic to the domain community. This is something to society as a whole. We want to constantly feel successful and constantly feel like we're doing the right things. But the steps to get there often are paved with lots and lots of failure. And so the more comfortable that we can all become sharing those failures so that we can learn from them and prevent others from repeating them, the better we'll all do.
Absolutely. Well, that's it. We have domain discussions and philosophical discussions here at NamePros, apparently.
Right. Got really deep here.
Well, thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate it. I know you have a busy schedule.